Um, okay, right. So, anyways, so have you like started working on React? Like, have you tried something on the internet?
No.
Okay, fine. So, okay, let's start with something basic. Can you tell me like what's your understanding of a framework is? Like, what is a framework?
Basically, I never understood this term framework. I always imagine it as a collection of files, something like that. But I can't understand the word meaning of that
Okay.
thing.
Mhm. Yeah, so framework basically is yes, it's a collection of files, but the collection of files, these collection of files basically enable you to do some things in a more refined way. That's what a framework does. Say
Okay.
so, like for example, if you have Spring Boot in Java, right?
Mm.
So can you like write a microservice without Spring Boot? The answer is yes. Okay, but what happens with Spring Boot? It provides you certain annotations which helps you to refine your code, make it more readable, and more importantly, like you don't have to repeat, the same stuff. For example, if you're trying to, create a constructor for a class, you need a constructor without arguments. You need constructor with arguments. Now you have to like unnecessarily keep on writing those constructors. So instead, you just use some annotation and that helps you out. So similarly is a React. React is like a JavaScript framework. So it's primarily used to create SPAs. Do you have any idea of SPA?
No.
Okay, so SPA stands for single page applications. So generally, if you see, let me give an example. Let's say um, okay, you have Facebook, you have Amazon. So if you visit Amazon, no, sorry, if you Facebook is also SPA, Twitter is SPA. Okay, nowadays, like all the modern applications are SPA, but you might remember like from the older times, or you might have seen sites where when you change the when you like route to a different page, it kind of opens up. It first stays on that page, then it spins, and then it opens up a new page. So if you check thoroughly,
Oh,
what
okay.
happens is that
So, is it something like a round trip? So it happens everything on the same page.
yes, correct. So you don't, so what happens with SPA is that it just fetches the data, and
Okay.
based on the data, all the code, like how it is going to look like on the UI, everything is already there defined in your application. Just based on the data, it will change how it looks.
Oh, all
So
right.
that gives you the impression like you're changing from one page to another, but actually you're just changing the elements that are present on the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. We will talk about that in great details later on. But so it just changes the elements on the screen based on the data that is getting to the server. Right. So earlier, like you have the MPA, which is multi-page applications. In those cases, we used to fetch both the both the data as well as how it's gonna look like the HTML part as well. If you remember, like earlier times, we used to write servlets and JSPs. So there we used to have monolith applications, like the entire thing from the UI to the backend, everything defined within the same code. Same code. Nowadays, you have microservices, and that's why on the UI front also you have things like SPA, which is like very what I can say coarse design kind of a pattern.
Okay.
So this is like an introduction to SPA, and this is what React enables you to do. React enables you to create SPAs.
Oh,
Now, and as the name itself suggests, it's like React, like it only reacts to data. So when you fetch the data from the server, how the data is like, based on that, you what is there on the screen. You can now how it does that. It uses something called JSX. So you might be familiar with HTML and CSS, right?
yeah.
So JSX is like a kind of sugar coated HTML. Actually, it's JavaScript. but it when you write it, it will appear to you more like a HTML. It will have tags and everything, but in reality, it's JavaScript.
Okay.
So and that's the reason why like in HTML you can't write if else conditions, right? And stuff like that. But in since JSX is JavaScript, you can easily put it in if else conditions. Like if the user is authorized to use the application, then show him the dashboard. If he is not authorized to use the application, then don't show him the dashboard. So show him like you're not authorized page. So these kind of if else statements can be written with React, because React uses JSX, which is just plain JavaScript.
Okay.
And but there is a little bit of difference between JSX and HTML. It's not like the same thing. Okay. So in JSX, you will have like the case is different. For example, if you have um, for some of the cases, like when there's a conflict, when you'll work, you will when you'll do POCs at that point of time, you'll see that for some cases at that point of time, I don't remember exactly some examples, but for some cases you will have some differences, like only in the case. Sometimes it will be capital letters, sometimes it will be small letters, but generally this is what JSX will be very similar to what HTML looks like.
Okay. So in React, we
And
also use camel case. Is it that or?
yeah, but like in JSX, you won't have camel case, but in camel case, when you write the codes, you have to adhere to the standards. So in there, we have to like use camel case, but
Okay.
the JSX won't be in camel case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and apart from that, you have this. Yeah. So one more important thing in React is what we call state management. So this is something that when you will work with React, you will work with it day in and day out. Uh, Now, what it means is that so so in React, what we do is that we divide our application into many different small parts, and we work on individual parts, but we need some kind of data sharing between them. Okay, let me present my screen. Let's see if I can explain like that. And so, no, this is not it. So let's say that the box at the top, it represents our root, like the application's root. And this is like the component of React, which deals with, let's say, orders, like what's there in the cart and all those things. And this one, let's say, deals with something which is order processing, like whether the orders, like what orders have been already placed and what's their status. So at some point of time, you may require, like while placing the orders, you may require to know what is there in the cart, if the cart is empty, or is the yeah if the cart is empty, or if the cart is um like full or something like that, you may require that data. So but this component is a child component to root, and this is also a child component of it, so you don't have a direct communication, direct link between these. And that's where the concept of state comes in, state management. So you have this, so you can think of state management as a global bucket where you put all the data that is shared between all the components. Okay, now data sharing in React happens in many different ways. One of the ways it happens is you pass down the properties from one component to another. The another way is to use a global state, where you basically put it in one global bucket, and from there any component can take it. Now, how you are going to basically share the data between the components primarily depends on the use case. So when you will do the POCs at that point of time, you will when we'll talk about props and stuff, at that point of time you'll slowly start to understand what I'm talking about here. Let me show you some. a basic React application to get an understanding. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Mm, okay, this is, you can take this one. Um, so I was giving an interview for one of the companies and I had to do this assignment there.
Okay.
So let's check this code. Mm, You know Git, right?
I mean, I have never used Git before.
Okay. Okay, so here I have used something called app.scss. So you know CSS, right?
Yeah.
So in CSS, SCSS is like a preprocessor for CSS.
Mhm.
So like for example, in CSS, we cannot do like nesting. Say for example, you have a nav bar and then you have a secondary small kind of nav bar. Now the secondary nav bar inherits all the styles from the original nav bar. So those kind of things, if you have a like more complicated CSS, then you write and then you use a preprocessor like SAS. So if you use SAS, you will have this app.scss.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but let's start. So the reason I chose this particular application is because this was for as part of the assessment, so it was very simple.
Mhm.
So yeah, so if you start with page, the first, the app or the any React app, it starts to um, run from this app.tsx, actually from this index.tsx. So in here, you can first, for now, you can ignore these lines, react.strict mode provider and all that. So main thing is this app. This gets rendered. This is your app.
Okay.
And yeah, and you can see you can see these, angular brackets. So it might remind you of HTML, but
Yeah.
you might not have seen these, what the content it contains, like React.stream or provider. You might be thinking like, what kind of tag is this provider? So
Yeah.
actually this is JSX and this is not a proper HTML element. This is a component which is getting rendered, and this is the app. So once you render, so root.render, you have the app. When it gets rendered, the flow comes here. So this is your app component. Now in here, you see that you are just, main thing is like what you are returning from this. So you are returning the nav bar and you're returning the home page. So you're returning these two things. And before doing that, you are checking some things like category rating, all those things. Those things are not required. So if I just run, let's see if I can run this. Do you know npm like node package manager and stuff?
No.
Okay. Install. First install this. Okay. Meanwhile, while it's installing, let me take you through some other areas of the app. Then you have this services. Inside the services, we basically define the APIs that we are going to call. And these are all async functions. Async in JavaScript. So all the API calls, they happen asynchronously. And there are many things like in React which happens asynchronously. Uh, you know what asynchronous means?
Not exactly.
Yeah, so asynchronous means, so when something happens in sync, let's say for example, uh, this line executes. Okay,
Mm.
then this is very much obvious that in the next, this line will execute. The control will flow to the next line.
Yeah.
Okay, but in asynchronous programming, this is not necessarily true. Okay, so let's say, and this is primarily done in cases where you have like some dependency, let's say an API call. So
Mm.
when you're calling some server API, then there's a dependency on the network. If the network is fast, you will get and if the server is not loaded, then you will get the response quickly. And if the server is loaded, then you don't get the response quickly. So if you do it synchronously, like do the API call synchronously, then it will affect the performance of the application. Like it will keep waiting for this to, happen. So until unless it's absolutely necessary, it's not recommended that we do API calls asynchronously. And this is just like one example. There are several other areas where we have to use asynchronous programming. For example, reading a file. Let's say you are trying to read a file. Now, this is, and then after reading the file, you're trying to do something else. So what it will do is that the reading of the file, this operation will be asynchronous. The rest of the operation will be synchronous. Now, you might be wondering like, if we are not going from one line to another line, the flow, the control does not go there, then how will we know like one, aspect is completed, like the API call got completed or not?
Yeah.
So for that, you have in JavaScript, you have something called promise. So a promise is like is a kind of a statement for which has not completed its execution yet, but is expected to complete its execution in the future.
Okay.
And in JavaScript, you have something called callback functions also. So
Mm.
using the callback function, you can actually check if, so you can actually define that once the promise gets executed, what we need to do. So in
Oh.
this way, we handle asynchronous operations. And in JavaScript and in React, you will use a lot, or in Angular or any other like Vue or any other framework, we very commonly use asynchronous operations.
So what is
So,
the difference between Angular and React?
okay, that's a good question. And so the difference between Angular and React is very technical in nature. So I'll try to explain you. So in Angular, you have observables. In React, you don't generally work with observables. You have some libraries through which you can enable it. So what an observable is like, um, how I can explain. Yeah, let's say that you have a button, and when you click on that button, um, no, think of it like this. Like you have an input box, and once you so you just want to write a simple program that whatever gets written in the input box also gets displayed on the page.
Okay.
Okay, so what you can do with Angular is like you can associate an observable with that particular input field. So when you associate an observable, it automatically does like in the observable, you can define what you want to do whenever there is some kind of change. Now React does not use observable. In here, you have to actually define the functions itself, and then you have to work on it. So for example, if you have to be like in a nutshell, what I can say is, let's say you have worked on C, right? C++, something like that.
Yeah, in college.
Yeah, in college, yeah. In C, you might have worked with C++. You might have worked with the Java or Python also,
Yeah.
maybe at some point. Yeah. So one thing that you might have noticed is that, let's say, for example, C, it gives you a lot of, what you can say, very fine controls. For example, in C, you can actually use the pointers to actually access the memory locations, right? But
Yes.
that is not possible with Java because Java uses the JVM, Java Virtual Machine. So using the JVM, so that's the reason you don't directly have access to the Okay, you don't directly have access to the actual, memory locations.
Hmm.
That's why Java is more secure. So so you can think of Angular and React in that way only. That React gives you Yes, in React you have to work a little bit extra, but it gives you very fine controls over what you want to do.
Okay.
On the other side, Angular does not want you, gives you that kind of a control, but Angular, what it does is that it does a lot of things for you. Okay. Also, let's say I can, let me show you one thing. If it opens up here, then I can show you. Yeah, so you also you need to know this tag blitz and one thing called code sandbox. So it's more like sandbox. You can very quickly start with your coding,
Mm.
whatever you want to do.
Okay.
You can use them for so when you come here, you can use React with TypeScript. Oh yeah, you want to learn React with TypeScript or JavaScript?
Um, Not sure anything will work because I have no clarity. Maybe I'm thinking what would be helpful in the future? Like, is it JavaScript or TypeScript?
Yeah, actually, you can. So TypeScript is like a superset of JavaScript. Okay, so the problem with JavaScript is that it's not OOP strict. So you know object-oriented programming, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So JavaScript is not OOP strict in the sense that you don't have to define exactly what kind of variable it is. Let's say
Oh.
I'll show you right now. If you go to console, so this is all JavaScript. If I so in JavaScript you can do like variable a equals to 5, okay, and you can also do variable b equals to, let's say, un.
Mm.
Okay. So what you can see here is that you don't have to define the data type for the variable explicitly, right?
Yeah.
And this is why JavaScript is not object oriented, OOP strict. Okay,
Oh.
it is object-oriented programming you can do with JavaScript. You can write classes and stuff,
Mm.
but it won't be very strict. And this essentially, like initially, all the developers used to work well with it, but what we found is that when the applications become very, very complicated or
Mhm.
very, very large, so in that kind of scenarios, we want the underlying language to be object-oriented strict because for example, let's say there's a large application and we get a variable and we are getting an error. Now, in order to understand like what it is supposed to receive, we have to do like we have to print it, like what the variable is getting. Okay. Now, let's say the variable is getting 5. Okay. We might think, okay, fine, 5 is enough. But the code works like it should be a string, and that you can only know once you look at the code. But if you use an object-oriented programming strict language like TypeScript, okay,
Mm.
then it will not allow the A to take up 5. It will directly throw an error, and that way you can know that, okay, fine, this is it's getting the variable is getting the value, but the value is incorrect. It should not
Okay.
get a number, it should get a string. So in that way, OOP strict kind of helps us to manage more complicated applications. But so my suggestion would be to we should start with JavaScript. And once we start with JavaScript, once you get comfortable with React, I'll tell you some addition steps to TypeScript, because TypeScript, as I said, is a superset of JavaScript. TypeScript is more like JavaScript. Now, there are only a few more things that you need to know. So
Um,
once you know Java and JavaScript and React, I'll tell you about TypeScript and how to implement in React. I think that
sure.
should be a better way.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we go to React JavaScript, so it creates a fresh environment. You can use this tag blitz, or you can also use Code Sandbox. Code Sandbox. This is my office laptop, so it won't. I think it won't open here. Let me try.
So these are
No, I
online
mean,
platforms, right?
yes, these are online platforms. These are sandboxes which you can use to quickly prototype your application. Let's say I'm trying to do a POC where I have to like just, kind of a scratch pad, create a scratch pad design. So in
Mm.
those cases, for quickly prototyping, we use this. So yeah, Code Sandbox is opening, but I think this part will not open
So we don't need
in.
Visual Studio for this.
Yeah, so this is like an online thing. You
Mm.
can use Visual Studio, and that will be like when you will be working offline, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, you can use Visual Studio. Like I have opened it here. Also, not this one.
Mm.
Yeah, this one. So you have this Visual Studio Code, and mostly when you are doing the development, you will use Visual Studio Code. But
Oh,
when you are in learning phase, okay, so at that point of time for quickly prototyping, you can use this one. Uh, because if you want to start with a React project, there are certain steps that you need to follow. First, you have to create React app. Then you have to, then you create an app. Then you have to do npm install to install all the dependencies, and then you start with it.
oh,
So instead of doing so many things, if you want to quickly try out a few things, then you can just go here and you already have it. You just need to change the code and try out things.
okay.
So yeah, so this is your app. It simply returns div and hello and start editing to see some logic or something like that. So let's edit. So yeah, I was trying to show you the difference between React and Angular. So let me show you this. Let's create a new file. Or maybe I can show it here. So I created an input box here. Now, now what I want is I want to display whatever content I'm writing in this input box to the page. So what I will have to do is I'll associate it with some ID. Hmm. Say my input, and here my constant. Right? Do a span here. Not valid as well as child elements. We want to render collection of children using array instead. Okay. So this will be not valid. Yeah, yeah, it's not working on my laptop. So this is an office laptop, and this will not work here.
Mhm.
But yeah, so what I can I can explain it to you in simple words. So this is my input box, and what I'm doing is that I've associated with my ID. And here I am trying to fetch the value of my ID. This was the ID that I gave,
Mm.
and this is the value. This is an object, so I get the value and I store it in this variable called value. And then I
So,
display this value
um,
here.
why are we defining it in the fourth line? I mean, in the seventh line, we have defined input and the value, but
Hmm.
why are we doing it in the fourth line again? Like,
Yeah,
what is
so
it exactly?
yeah, so this is so what we are doing in the seventh line is defining the input box only
Yeah.
with the ID. And what we are doing in the eighth line is we are asking the browser to display the value of the variable value.
Okay.
Okay. But what does this value contain? Okay. If we do not define it,
Mm.
then what will it show? So we are defining the value here.
Okay. So, why are we defining it in the fourth line? Why not in the div tag, or why not after the div tag? Like, we are
Hmm.
defining it before return, right?
Yes. So that's because when this is a functional component, right? So from the functional component, we return JSX,
Okay.
and this is not JSX. This is this is JavaScript,
Yeah.
and you can see this JSX tag. So we return this JSX. That's why we are not doing it here. So, yeah, so all these questions, like, you will understand slowly and once we start with it. But
Okay.
what I wanted to show you was, um, so in here you see, like, I have to define a variable called value, then fetch the value of my input, and then get the value, and then we render it, right? So, but in Angular, this will not be the case. In Angular, you will have observables. In React also now, this is like React 16 or 17 is the latest version of React. So in here, you have something called useref hook, useref from React. So if you use this hook, useref, then
Mm.
it works more like observable only. Not observable, but it, at least helps. So in Angular, you will have an observable and you don't have to write all these things like these things. So there, all you have to do is like input ID equals to my input, and you have to write something like this: value equals to dollar value, something like this. So this, what it does is that it associates your this is called two-way binding in this is a feature in Angular. This is not there in React. And that's what I was trying to explain, like in a nutshell, that Angular provides you more features, but React provides you more finer control over your data.
Okay.
So yeah. And secondly, there are other like changes in terms of like design pattern, how we design React, how we go forward designing a React app is quite different from how we go forward designing an Angular app. And apart from that, you in Angular there are so when I talk about design patterns in React, you have components. In Angular, you have many things, like you have directives, you have services, you have pipes for for handling the data. And all those are kind of extended features of React, but in for Angular, but in React you don't have these things. You don't have directives, you don't have stuffs like pipe. What you have is that plain simple functions. In
Okay.
using those functions, um, you can manipulate the data the way you want to. And that's what I was saying, that it's more simple with React, but you have to, yes, you have to write a little bit more code, but you will have more finer control over your data. But in React, if you are like very good with all those using pipes and all, then yeah, it's fine. But again, one of the problem is the bundle size also. So when you deploy any app like React app or Angular app, when you deploy it in production, so it's not like deployed like this. You will not find codes like this. Okay, it will be something called beautified, and it creates a small bundle there. So the bundle size for Angular is large, but the bundle size for React is small. So this is like a very, very deep technical thing. I don't want to get into this, otherwise you get confused. So we'll start with small things. Like the first thing I'll do is I'll start with JavaScript.
Okay.
So yeah, so once you get, so for learning React in JavaScript, you require certain things. Yeah, let me stop in notepad. So first you have to learn about functions, because we work mostly with functional components. You
Mm.
have to learn about map, reduce, and all these functions, stream functions, because we use it quite often. You'll have to learn about destructuring objects, okay, to learn about working with objects, and some basic JavaScript. And yeah, class based component, class, and all those things. So in React you will find two kinds of projects. One we call a brownfield project, and one we call greenfield project. So if like when I was working like back in 2018, at that point of time, most of the React projects that I used to work with classes. Okay, so there used to be like class-based components. You used to define a class, and then you used to do it. Then in 2019 or 20, I don't remember exactly, and the hooks got introduced. And with hooks, the React, now you can write purely functional components. You do not require class-based components. There were some issues with class-based components, like the state update was asynchronous, and there were other things. Okay, so if you like, let's say, start working on a project, if you see that their class is being used, know that it's a brownfield project, like it was developed long time back, like maybe
Okay.
2008. And if you see, like, but the probability is that most of the times you will always find projects where you use purely functional components, because nowadays nobody uses class-based components. So
Okay.
this is like not very important, but we will just get some brief idea about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and my suggestion. Okay, so can you give me a like a uh, uh, an introduction, like what so in your college days you learned JavaScript, so exactly did you do with JavaScript? Did you created forms or stuff like that?
Yeah, so that was a basic JavaScript we had. So we were working on um, events like what should I say? We a little bit worked on functions also.
Mm-hmm.
Function arrays, and most of the times we were working on PHP and JavaScript simultaneously. So it was mostly based on the PHP side, but for the
Mm-hmm.
implementation part, just for the UI part, we have used JS, that's all.
Okay.
So we were working on functions, arrays, loops, something like this, but I can't
Mm.
recall it exactly, but these are the things I tried.
Okay. Okay, so let me give you some introduction to some of the simpler things to do with JavaScript.
Sure.
Um, okay, so for any language we start with functions, right? So a function, sorry, not with function, I mean the variables.
Yeah.
So in JavaScript, the variables are generic, but there are like three different keywords with which you can create variables. One is var, okay,
Mm.
one is let, okay, and one is const. So the const is basically means it's a constant. Let's say if I define const a equals to 5, and then I try to make a equals to 6, this gives us an error because a was defined as a constant. So if you define any variable as constant, you can't change it. Okay.
Okay.
But you can define, let's say if you have variable a equals to, okay, so I've already defined that. Variable b equals to, let's say, 5. And then if you want to change b to 6, then you can do it
Okay.
because it's a variable.
Mm.
And you have let, and the other keyword is let. So the let also does pretty much, let's say c equals to 7. VC, I want to change it to 8. And yeah, so let also does the same thing as var, but there is a very intricate difference between var and let. I'll let you know what it is. But one thing that you need to notice here is that we can give any kind of data type to the variables. Okay, let's say b is 5, we can also write b as something,
Okay.
which is a
Mhm.
string. We can also give b as 0.5678 something, which is a float. So this is like in JavaScript. You can also find it in Python. Yeah, so these are like OOP, not OOP strict languages. So you can give it any data type you want.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, apart from this, one more thing is objects. Okay, so a variable can be a primitive type, and it can also be non-primitive type. So in college, you might have learned it, right? Primitive and non-primitive data types. So a variable can be primitive, like we saw, and it can be non-primitive also, which is the case of an object. So in objects, you have it's more like a key value pair. So you have a key, and based on that, you have a value. Let's
Problem.
say name, you can give it a name like something, and you can give some age to it, 26. Identifier A has already been declared. Okay, we already used A as a const, so we can't use it. Let's say we use C. Okay. So C here you can see is an object. This is non-primitive type. Like this is based on some primitive values. For example, name it's a string, and age it's a number. You can know the data type for each of them
Mm.
by using the type of keyword. So you can write type of C dot age. You can see it's a number,
Yeah.
and you can write type of C dot name. Then it's a string. So this object, we very frequently work with these objects because in real world, you know that the data is most of the times non-primitive. It's like
Yeah.
based on multiple primitive data types. So this is like one thing that I wanted to tell you about objects.
Mm.
Now, with objects comes this thing, destructuring, and I'll talk about map reduce in a short while. So let's talk about destructuring first. Let
Okay.
me clear this and print out the object first. So let's say that I want to get the name from the object C. So one way I can do it is like I can define a variable name and we can write C dot, name. Okay. So in that case, name will be something which is correct. This works, but many times like we have to destructure a lot of things, like let's say it has name, age, address, phone number, date of birth, and other things, and from this entire object we want a lot of things. We want let's say phone number, and we want date of birth, we want name, we want address, everything. So if we do like this, like name equals to C dot name, then address equals to C dot address, then blah blah blah, then you can obviously think that it will become long and it's not a good way, right?
Yeah.
So what we do is we do an destructuring of the object.
Okay.
Let's say we want a name. So what we can do is we can write name and age, and um, you can just write, give three dots
Mhm.
and put C here. So now if you write name, you get something. You get write age, you can get something. So these three dots here is the main thing. So it kind of destructures the objects and breaks it down into age, name, and whatever you want from the object, you can write it here and you can get it from. So this is what we call destructuring an object.
If there are like so many hundreds of I mean elements in the object, even if
Mm-hmm.
we give that here, like let some phone number out of those 100 elements, will
Mm-hmm.
the same thing work, like three dots and the object name?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're saying that if the object C contains, apart from name and age, it also contains thousands of different
Yeah.
keys. And if you just give name, age, and then phone number, and then destructure this object, will this populate the variables on the
Yeah.
left side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it will do. Yes, it
Okay.
will do. Yeah. But yeah, one thing is generally this is like a single object. We don't generally when we work, when you will work, you will see that most of the times you won't get a single object. Most of the times you get something like this. So you have an object.
Mm.
Okay, let's do it D. Name it D. Okay, and you have inside the object you have an array, and inside array you have like different objects. Okay. So this is generally how we get objects in real world.
Okay.
Okay, so when this happens, at that point of time, if you just do dot 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 D, that's not gonna work. Okay, because it will destructure just the first part, which is the you know
Array.
array. Yeah. So in order to destructure the actual object, you might have to go one step deep. Maybe you index at 0 or index at 1. When you get that object, you can destructure it.
Okay.
Right. So So one thing that we do generally is, um, so how do you like tackle this problem? Or maybe we can keep this problem simpler. Let's say that we have an array. It has 4, 5, 6. Let's say it has 6 elements. Okay. Now I want to access all the elements and I want to do something with it. Okay. So this is like your introduction to functional programming in JavaScript.
Okay.
So how do we do this? One way will be to uh, write a for loop, and let's say I want to increment the value of each of the elements in the array by 1.
Okay.
So we can do is we can run a for loop for this, or we can do one more thing. So let's first start with the for loop. So the first condition for the first thing for the for loop is the iterator. You can write I equals to 0. Okay, and then I want it to go till the length of the array. So array dot length, and I want it to get incremented by 1. Right. Now for each element in the array at I, array at I want to just increment it by 1, and that's all I want to do. Right. So now if you was this kind of one to page to reconnect. Okay. So now if you do, oops, sorry. Okay, the dev tools got disconnected. Let me refresh this one. Oh, that's the reason.
Here we were writing array dot length, right?
Yeah.
Instead of that, can we write I is less than, I mean, less than or equal to 6 or 7? I mean, we had 6 elements, so why, like, why exactly are we using length instead of that?
Yeah, I think okay, I don't remember what I wrote. Did I write array like let I equals to 0 semicolon, then I less than array dot length, right? Did I write that?
No, you have written array dot length. Yeah, sorry, array dot.
Yeah, if that is the case, then yeah, it might be wrong. Let array equals to this, and for let I equals to 0,
Mm.
and I should be less than array dot length and I plus plus. And then I want to increment each element in I by 1,
+1.
and I just end it. Okay. So if you now get the array, so you have all the elements incremented by 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that this is like one way to do it. The
Mm.
other way to do it, but and a more JavaScriptish way to do it, I should say, is to use a map. So what a map does is that it basically maps all the elements to an anonymous function. Okay, now coming to anonymous functions, I'll talk about anonymous functions when I'll do functions. But for the timing, you can understand of anonymous functions like it is an anonymous function, like it does not have any name. Okay, so in JavaScript, you will find many such weird things like, you may find functions which does not have a name. You can find functions which are defined within a function. So these things happen in JavaScript a lot, but you will get comfortable with it once you start working. So right now, so what map does is that it takes each and every element, okay, and passes it on to an anonymous function. This inside this anonymous function, whatever you want to do with it, you can do it and then return the element. So it will create a new array from your existing array. So let me show it to you how it's done. Okay, so let new array goes to array. And then we use the map method on this. Yeah. So you can see It's written F, the callback function, and this argument. So we are going to define this callback function only. First, we need the element, and we define this anonymous function here. And what we do is that we do element equals to element plus one, and we return this element, and we close this, and we close this one. Now, if you see the new array, so if you'll see that all the elements are incremented by one. So this is like a more JavaScriptish way to actually do the same thing. We are doing the same thing what we did for the for loop. Okay, the only difference is that we use the map method. So what map method does is that it takes your element, okay, and passes this. This is like syntax for an anonymous function. This is
Okay.
called an arrow function in JavaScript. Okay, so this passes it to an arrow function. So this takes element as the argument, and then it increments the element by one and returns this element. So this new array, whatever element, it will loop through the array, and whatever element, for each element, it will return the element, and this gets appended to the new array. That's how you create this.
Okay.
So this is what we do. And for the functions, like in JavaScript, you have many different kinds of functions. As I said, you have anonymous, but two most important ones are, one is the named function and the other one is an arrow function or an anonymous function. So let me show you both of them. So if you have named functions, then the definition for that is quite clear. Like you just have to write function, which defines what a function is. Then you will have to write, let's say function increment by one. It takes, let's say, a number, and what it does is it just increments it by one. So return number is one. So if you pass increment by one and you pass the value two, it should return three. Okay, so this is how you write a normal function. And but sometimes in JavaScript you can actually assign a function to a variable. Okay, and that's where the concept of arrow function comes in. So we'll write the same function, but in a little bit different way. So what we'll do is that constant um, increase, let's say we change the name so that it doesn't conflict, increase by one. And yeah, so then we do something like this. And then here we pass the element and sorry. Oops. Then you have to do this, return this one. Yeah. Now if you like to increase by one, you pass two, it returns three. So you can see these two are functions only. Okay. But you can see one difference is that this is a defined function, like clearly is increment by one. But this one is like, this is a variable, right? It's a constant, it's a variable, and to this variable is assigned a function. This function does not have any name. Okay, whatever is the name of the variable, you can use that to call this function, because this function itself is assigned to this variable. So if you are like familiar with Java or C, this might seem like a very weird thing, but in JavaScript, this is like very common. So I can actually show you how these things are used. If I go here, now you will be able to make a little bit sense of, if I go to, let's say, service, yeah, the service. So you have this function, right? Function get product details. So now you can make sense of like what this is, right?
Yeah.
Constant function. Yeah, this is just a function. And if you want to see like where anonymous functions are used, then basically the arrow functions are used in many places, like in React. If you see here, so this is an example of an arrow function. So constant card is your variable, and
Mm,
to this, this is okay. This is like a little bit of TypeScript here with any height, any. So you can ignore this part for now.
okay.
Okay, but it takes width, height, and image URL, and this is within curly braces. So basically, it takes an object which has keys, width, height, and image URL, and this is the argument to this anonymous function. And what this anonymous function does is that it returns this JSX.
Okay.
So this is like an example of where how this anonymous functions are used. And this is like a very commonplace things. Once you start working, or once you start using React, you'll see that it's very you'll get used to it basically. Yeah, so these are also examples of arrow functions. You can see here, this is a constant, this is a variable. It takes event, which is just a variable. Since we are using TypeScript, so we have to define what is the type of event. So that's why it's there. But if you are using JavaScript, it will only be event. And then you have the function body. Whatever you want to do, you can take it. You can set it from here. So this is like, oh, I think it's pretty much enough for today, because if we can talk more about reduce and stuff, but uh, I I would suggest that you first get comfortable with map. So let me see if I can give you something. Um, okay, what you can do with all these things. Okay, why don't you like try building a simple calculator using JavaScript?
In calculator, okay.
Yeah. So when you use the calculator, you will be using functions a lot, because you will have plus, minus, and all those things will be defined as part of functions. Okay. And okay, for using, yeah, the calculator, maybe you can keep a history saved in it. And then you can use map functions there. Okay. Okay, I don't want to like whatever you want to use from whatever we learned today, you can use it. Okay,
Mm,
but try making a calculator,
okay.
and yeah, and learn about like when you get free time, just Google about these things and learn a little bit. I'll give you one is the functions, JavaScript function, anonymous, and in JavaScript functions, primarily learn about arrow-based, arrow or not arrow-based, and arrow functions and anonymous functions. The second thing you learn is when you learn about map reduce, and for object destruction, I think you all already understood. For working with objects, I think you just need to practice that. And yeah, that's it. So just go through these very basic things, and yeah, some basic JavaScript. If you can go through that, it would be great.
Yeah.
So basic JavaScript, like when I used let's say this one, when I was working with stack plates, I used something called not this one. Yeah, like document dot get element by ID.
Mm,
Oh yeah, yeah. One more thing. You try to get a little bit of know a little bit about DOM. I forgot to tell you about DOM. It's called a document object model. Yeah. So you just learn a little bit about DOM. Okay, then I'll explain to you how React uses. React actually does not use DOM. It uses something called virtual DOM.
oh, okay.
And yeah, and that's the reason. So yeah, this is another difference. Like if you're using Angular, and if you make changes to it, like to your code, then you have to like rerun, or at least it will take a lot of time, because it will recompile the entire DOM in Angular. But in React, it uses virtual DOM. So if you make changes, it will like instantly compile and instantly reflect also. So working becomes a little bit easier. And that's why like React is fast, because it does not actually change your DOM overall. It creates a virtual DOM and it creates a tree-like structure there. And that's why it becomes very fast. So this is like you don't need to know a lot of things about these things. These things like are very theoretical, like you will not use it so much in your while you're working, but it's more like theoretical. It's better to know it, because you may get asked in interviews or in other places
Okay.
that what. And generally in React this is a very common question, like what is a virtual DOM, what is DOM, etc. So
Mm.
just go through some Google finds, and that's all.
Okay.
Yeah. And tomorrow, uh, okay, okay, you try creating a calculator.
Sure.
Mm, say, so tomorrow, what we will do? Um, yeah, tomorrow we'll work with forms, because I think that's the best exercise we have,
Mm.
because in forms you have to handle very different kinds of data. You have to do some data manipulation also.
Okay.
So we'll work with forms tomorrow,
Mm.
and that will be a sort of conclusion. That will, I think, that much. If you know that much of JavaScript, we have created a calculator and a form. Then I think that's pretty much it. We can get started with. Then after tomorrow's class, then we'll start with React a little bit. Very like basic kind of React will start. Okay. That is the plan for this week. I mean, what's the day to do? Wednesday or Thursday, Friday? Okay. Yeah, then this week we will just focus on JavaScript.
Mm.
Yeah, and then you will get Saturday, Sunday, you can brush up even more of JavaScript. And then from Monday, we'll start with React.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you then. Happy hacking.
Sure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.